Welcome to the Reformation Fellowship Podcast. Reformation Fellowship provides support and fellowship for all who would stand for the reformation of Christ Church worldwide. We long to see the church revitalized by the gospel and seek to encourage all who share that vision. We gather together for gospel-hearted fellowship around gospel-minded theology. Welcome back to the Reformation Fellowship Podcast. My name is Justin Schell, and I am your host. We have a special conversation for you today that I am excited to share because it's all aimed at encouraging the heart of pastors. And maybe that's you. Maybe you know a pastor that you want to point in this direction. Maybe there are some principles that, as we talk about pastoral fellowship groups, that apply to your life, even if you're not a pastor. But we are talking about pastor groups or pastor fellowships. What does it look like when gospel ministers intentionally connect with one another for encouragement, for shared wisdom, for prayer, for maybe some mutual equipping, maybe for some mentoring? And so it's just a wonderful topic. Wonderful conversation with Andy Taylor and Michael Swindell. They will introduce themselves in a moment, but we're so glad you've joined us on this episode on pastoral fellowships, and let's get started. Michael, Andy, thank you so much for joining us here on the Reformation Fellowship Podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Justin.
Good to see you.
Yes. We are talking about pastoral fellowship or pastor groups. But before we jump into that, I wonder, could each of you take a moment, just introduce yourselves? Who are you? Where do you live? What's your favorite color? That sort of thing.
Yeah, my name is Andy Taylor. I am currently the senior pastor at Arrow Heights Baptist Church. Been here for about 6.5 years, but am transitioning now into a new role with my denomination. I'm Southern Baptist, and our state denomination, Oklahoma Baptist, has asked me to come on as what is titled as a regional ministry partner. I'll be encouraging, discipling, equipping pastors around the state of Oklahoma, and we'll be getting that role in April the 1st. So, right. Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Michael.
Yeah, my name is Michael Swindell. I'm currently in West Michigan, just west of Grand Rapids. So, family life, married to Ann for 16 years this May. We have 2 little kids, Ella, who's 8, and Judah, who's 4. I'm currently the Connections and Discipleship Pastor at Wellspring Church in Hudsonville, Michigan. I've been there about 2 years now, and basically I tackle everything from membership to small groups to men's groups, even am about to start overseeing some of the women's ministry as well. A little bit about our church. We're probably best described as non-denominational, conservative Bible church. It's probably a good way to describe us. And my family loves skiing together, we found out. So Judah's only 4, Ella's 8, but since we've been to West Michigan, we've been doing some ski lessons. And so just a little bit about the personal life, something we've enjoyed in this area.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you both for making some time to talk about pastoral fellowships. Michael, maybe I'll start a question for you. You've recently written a blog for Reformation Fellowship on about some of the challenges of getting pastors together. Could you maybe share a little bit about your experience? Maybe folks haven't read the blog, but yeah, can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So pastoral fellowships, I know for many pastors it's an exciting idea. It's something that they want. It's something that they crave. For me, it's a bit of a nerve-wracking idea. It's a bit scary. Been wounded by more than one pastor in my past. And so as those listening can understand when you're wounded by somebody, it hurts. When you're wounded by somebody in a position of spiritual leadership over you, it can hurt a little deeper. It can last a little longer. And so for me, one of my big hurdles that I need to jump over every time I even think about this is the hurdle of, what if I get hurt again, right? Am I going to be duped into a relationship that's unhealthy or painful on some level? And so for me, that's a big hurdle. And I know I'm not the only one. And I know even people who I've asked or who I approach about a pastoral group, I know they have their own struggles in general. I think pastors just in general do. We know what it means to be hurt. We know what it means to be, betrayed, have confidence is betrayed. I think we've all been there if we've been in the ministry for very long. And so for me, that's a big hurdle, is just willing to risk trusting life, the burdens that I bear with other pastors.
Yeah. Andy, you see similar things in the lives of pastors you're interacting with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Michael is describing is not uncommon. In fact, it's fairly a typical story, and I think it also generates the need and the drive among pastors, whether they have been hurt or feel isolated, for pastors to get together, to encourage one another, to, as Michael said, to risk the opportunity to fellowship with one another. I think it's just so vital, especially over what we've seen, not just in the last 2 years with COVID and all that craziness, but this has been an ongoing problem for ages, throughout the history of the church, that pastors feel isolated, and pastors need to have conversation and fellowship and communion with other pastors who are dealing with some of the same kind of issues, just to know that they're not alone, and to find strength and encouragement with one another.
If I can hop in on that, even with the hurdle that I mentioned earlier about trusting other pastors, why am I then going out and seeking other pastors right now? Exactly what Andy said. I need it. Pastoral isolation doesn't work. So as big as the hurdle might be in trusting other pastors and spiritual leaders, the last 2 years of being isolated due to COVID and other factors, it doesn't work. So there really isn't that option on the table.
Yeah, that makes sense. Andy, could we, looking at your context as you, maybe within your denomination or in the city there or across the state, what are some signs you're seeing that maybe are signs that there's a need for more of this?
Yeah, I think we're seeing not only younger pastors who are desiring to get together for the sense of mentorship and being equipped in maybe some of the things that young pastors deal with coming into a church kind of idealistically, and then sometimes getting slapped in the face with reality, and the desire to have an older, more experienced man come alongside them. But I think what we're also seeing, just in men who have been reaching out to us, is that seasoned pastors who've been around for a while, who have the battle scars of church and the joys of experiencing the beauty of the gospel in the midst of great gospel community. They know that there's this great need for them to be with one another, so that they can encourage one another in the pathway of finishing strong. So I think we see it across the board, regardless of age, denomination, experience. Pastors want to be encouraged and challenged and loved with other pastors.
Yeah. Friends, we want to take just a moment out of our conversation to tell you about the upcoming Reformation Fellowship Conference in Atlanta, Georgia, November 11th through 12th. Our theme, the theme that we will gather around, is the gospel, our hope, our banner. We want to come together, celebrate the gospel, unite around the gospel, and be encouraged in the gospel. You will hear plenary addresses from Michael Reeves, Dane Ortland, Phil Ryken, Jeff Norris. You will also select a track to participate in at the conference. There's a track for any Christian who just wants to go deeper in their faith. There's a track for pastors, a track for women, and a track for theologians and scholars. And the hope for these tracks is to grow you, to develop you wherever you're at and whatever way you're serving the church, but also to encourage you by connecting you with others in a similar place. Those tracks are each led by wonderful theologian leaders, and we just know that you're going to be encouraged. So that is November 11th and 12th in Atlanta, Georgia, hosted by Perimeter Church. It will be the first Reformation Fellowship Conference in the U.S., and we will gather around the gospel, our hope, our banner. Everything you need to know, you can find at reffellowship.org. That's refellowship.org. We hope to see you there. Yeah, so there's an aspect of, for the younger pastor, maybe it's, I know there are things seminary didn't teach me.
Right.
There are lessons I still need to learn. It's pastoring's complicated, so I'd love to soak up the wisdom of those that have been around a little longer. But for others who have been around a while, they need that fellowship. They need the encouragement, maybe some accountability as they seek to finish strong. Michael, what might be some other benefits that you see for pastors as benefits, why you should get together? Maybe we could ask, if someone's wondering, why should I've been around, so I got a little wisdom of my own. I'm not on the tail end, so I'm not worried about finishing strong, whether that's good or not to think that way. But what are some other reasons someone might consider stepping into regular fellowship with other pastors?
I do think there is a bit of iron sharpening iron in terms of ministry skills and wisdom, helping, get some feedback on current situations so you can pastor better. I do think that's one of the benefits. But for me, the primary benefits are relational. They're on the heart level. Spiritual friendship is necessary. And especially when you talk with people who are going through very similar struggles, they've had very similar experiences, just in a different context. Sometimes it's helpful just to know you're not crazy. As I've reached out to multiple pastors here in the area, one of the things that I'm just stunned by is how common the struggles have been. Everybody went through COVID. Everybody goes through pastoring struggles. Everybody's dealing with similar sheep with similar struggles. And so to me, it's that spiritual friendship, but also, I'm blessed to have, there's multiple pastors on staff where I'm at, and we have an elder board, and they're great to connect with. But it is really nice to have a confidential group of pastors who are outside of your immediate context, a place where you can feel a little bit more free to speak freely about your context, and they don't know the people, they don't know the situation, and there's something I think relationally freeing about that as well. So for me, yes, are there ministry skills that I can develop and have developed and rubbing shoulders with other pastors? Yes, but for me, it's primarily the heart issue. It's getting filled up with spiritual friendship from people who are like-hearted and like-minded in the faith.
Yeah,
great.
Justin, if I could just jump in on that, I love what Michael is saying right there, and I think this is probably the number one, the top priority that we have seen here in Oklahoma about pastors wanting to be together. Is just encouragement, to have spiritual friendships. I kind of break it down into three groups, if you will, that I've experienced over the almost 35 years of ministry, whether it's been in the local church. I'm also a retired Army chaplain. So I've seen it in lots of different settings. But the first and the top most desired by far is what Michael is talking about, is that group of encouragement. Right now, I meet with a group of young pastors. They're either have been in ministry for 5 years or less, or they are potential, or they're seeking to be pastors. I've got a group of young men I meet with, and I see that kind of as an equipping time. Now, obviously, there's great bleed over on these. Bleed over, that may not be the right word for it. There's great crossover in what happens. There's encouragement along with the equipping, and with the equipping, there's also encouragement. I've also been a part of a group that was just strictly what we called a theological reading group. It was a group of guys that we'd all been in ministry for more than 25 years at the time. We were all friends, and we were all reading theological works together, and then discussing to sharpen ourselves. So I think it's good for us to know the purpose of the relationship, but there's always crossover in this. And in that, I'm reminded of Charles Simeon, who, to me, one of my heroes. I love to read about, an 18th century, I guess you'd call him a Puritan, pastored the Holy Trinity Church in Cambridge for 54 years. The first 13 years that he pastored there, the church literally locked him out of the pews because they didn't want him. And what he did for encouragement with that was he turned to the pastoral students, ministry students at Cambridge, and began to mentor them. And they became, some of his closest friends, and encouraged his soul as he's encouraging them. So there's lots of good reasons for pastors to meet together.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I've heard you guys mention, obviously, the spiritual friendship piece. It could be theologically enriching. There could be some skills that are learned or shared during this time, or just a sharing of wisdom, either with peers or older to younger. I think that's great to think through the needs of a group, and to make sure that we're serving the folks that are there. Michael, you've mentioned that even on this podcast episode so far, that you've been meeting with some pastors, reaching out to them in your area. I wonder, let's pretend for a moment I'm a pastor. I'm not a part of a pastoral group, but I'd like to be. Maybe I look around and there's not one available locally, at least that I know of. What lessons have you learned, or how might you recommend someone go about starting a pastoral fellowship, or initiating something like what we've been talking about?
I think one thing I've realized is there's never going to be a good time in my pastoral schedule to do it. It's not like, I'm going to finish this week and next week, finally, things are going to open up and I'm going to have all this time to go initiate relationships. It just doesn't work that way for me. I don't think it works that way for most pastors. And so I found if I don't put it in my calendar, if I don't reach out to people, it's just not going to happen. I have to put that has to be a big rock I put in first, or it just doesn't happen. And it's just much easier to invite people you've met with first, as opposed to just shooting off a blast email to people you don't know. It's just hard. And so one of the things I've done pretty consistently is almost every week, maybe every other week, over the last month and a half is meeting with somebody new. And so there's that. I also think too, and I was pretty hesitant at the beginning, but sometimes you just have not because you ask not. I'll give you a great example. One of the pastors I met with, in lieu of the conversation, he said, I'm already meeting with the pastoral group. We've been meeting for a while, basically, seemed pretty intact. And I was like, why am I going to ask this guy? He's already got a group. But I asked anyway. And turns out, one, he invited me to his group if there was any time that I could do that. But secondly, he even said, hey, we have a place at our church that you guys could meet once you get your group up and going. That never would have happened had I not just asked. And I think sometimes, at least for me, and we've already talked about my hurdles at the beginning, but for me, that ask is a big deal. And so just having the gumption to do it, to just say, we've met, I appreciate who you are, I'd love to get to know you better, and not being afraid of that ask. So for me, sometimes you have not because you ask not. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, Justin, I'd sum this up in one word: food. Food. Everybody
like a true Southern Baptist.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody has to eat. You eat 20 plus meals a week. Every disciple making encounter, and I'm going to link those two together here. Every disciple making encounter in the Gospel of Luke is either going to, centered around, or coming from a meal. Everybody has to eat.
Yeah.
So, generally when I want to do this, the how-to for me is to say, hey, would you come have lunch with me? I want to discuss something with you.
Yeah.
And because we are busy people, pastors are incredibly busy people. This is why they need it. This is why they need that fellowship, to slow down over a meal, over some chips and salsa at your favorite Mexican restaurant. And maybe even, this might even be the opportunity to say, let me buy you your meal. Let me buy lunch for you.
Yeah.
I think that this is just a great way for us to get together, to slow down, to be away from all of the things that are going on. And I think a great place is food, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wonder how much busyness is almost as much a hurdle as the fear of vulnerability for a lot of pastors as well. They're just so busy. And that's not to stand over in judgment. They have a lot on their plates. But as you guys have both made a strong argument for it, it's such a need. It's such a need, and it's not going to happen if we don't prioritize and take initiative to make it happen. So, yeah, no, that's good. That's good, and we all love food, so I'll say amen to that. Andy, you had mentioned earlier you're transitioning into a role that, in many ways, the primary task in that role is to develop younger pastors, encourage those that are already in the pastorate to keep going, some equipping. So this is kind of becoming your full-time job. As you look at kind of the landscape, the landscape, maybe we can edit out my landscape, but maybe not. We'll leave it in. We're all being vulnerable here. As you look at the landscape of pastor groups, or maybe just some of the needs you see, what would you say are some of the best practices you've seen, or whether that's in Oklahoma or you've maybe looked at other states or other countries, maybe you've looked at the past, some of the best practices you've seen in developing these kinds of groups?
Yeah, it's real interesting. This is something that we've talked about here quite a bit, and even almost with reservation talking about best practices, because there is this concept that, boy, if that worked for them, that's what's going to be best for us. I think sometimes the best thing for us to do is get together with some guys and say, hey, what do you want out of this? What do you need? What is this? What's going to be good for you with this? I mean, we've done a number of things. A group that I'm currently with right now, we've read a book, a very small book, because again, pastors are incredibly busy. Don't want to overburden them with these kind of things, but on calling, just to reaffirm calling in each of us and to be reminded of what our calling is. Yeah. Sometimes we get together and we just maybe read the scriptures together and discuss it. Yeah. Which sometimes pastors just need to be a part of something like that where they're not in charge of it. Sometimes we get together and we just pray. Yeah. And sometimes we just get together and we talk about food. So I think food and family. I think it's just different for each group. I think it's important to kind of discuss among ourselves, what is it that we're really seeking? And let's stick with that. Mm-hmm.
Following up on that, I on the podcast here, we had Dr. Michael Haykin a few weeks ago talking about his book, Iron Sharpens Iron. And in that, he unpacks a friendship, a 19th century friendship between a couple of pastors and the fruit in their own lives and in their ministries from it. Is there, and Andy, you mentioned Charles Simeon, and feel free to share more about that, but is there an historic or perhaps even a modern example of this sort of fruitful friendship that you look to as a model or as encouragement? Not that we're going to take it and replicate it somewhere, but that you say that's the kind of experience that I hope every pastor can have.
Yeah, I mean, I do look at Dr. Haykin's book and see, the friendships that Andrew Fuller had. I think those are, I think it's good for us to see historical models of this. Simeon definitely had friendships with, I think his name was Henry Veach and his son John, or it might be the other way around. I can't remember right now. But I look at like, and you have to be careful again with this because you don't want to. We don't want to idealize things or make them bigger than they need to be. But, a friendship between a John MacArthur and a R.C. Sproul, you see kind of those kind of relationships that are built. But we see what happens on the screen, or we see what is given to us, but we don't see what's behind the scene, those phone calls, those text messages, those emails, in our modern day setting between pastors that are just vital for encouragement and just to be reminded, hey, I've got a brother that's out there. He's doing the fight like I am, and we can strengthen one another, be an Aaron and a Hur for Moses, to hold up those arms and to care for one another. I think it's just encouraging for us to know that this is a good thing to have.
Yeah. Michael, anything to add there?
I would just say, again, I didn't have the text messages or the emails, but part of my seminary training was at Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis. And one of the things that was really sweet to watch is those men and the way that they honored one another, loved one another. It was sincere. It was real. I loved watching them. Most of the classes at Covenant were team taught. There was 2 professors teaching every class. And so you got to see some of that friendship play out in that classroom setting. And it was wonderful to watch. It was wonderful to see. And so I really did appreciate my time there. I feel like I got a sneak peek at some of that. I got the ability to go with one of my Covenant professors to the 2015 Gospel Coalition Colloquium, which is where they meet on the off year, just the members of the Gospel Coalition proper, and then some of the people they invited. And being kind of on the inside, hearing, D.A. Carson speak and seeing some of these bigger names, interact in a more intimate setting was beautiful and wonderful to watch, seeing them, interact together over lunches and stuff like that. So I just remember thinking, wow, what a wonderful group of men, faithful, godly pastors coming together across denominational lines and loving one another and encouraging one another. So those are some of the experiences that I've seen that have been just inspiring on some level. And, again, not knowing all the ins and outs of those relationships, something to say, I want to be a part of groups like that in my life.
Yeah. Awesome.
Justin, I would just add to what Michael just said right there is something that's probably should be obvious to all of us, but it's not always, is that it will take intentionality on our part. Be a friend to someone else.
Yeah.
And this is the how-to. How does this happen? Be a friend to somebody else. Call somebody up. Somebody that you went to seminary with, like Michael said. I know for me in my doctoral work at the Master's Seminary, there are two or three guys that I'm still very close with. We still, we WhatsApp with one another just to check on each other and see how we're doing. Be a friend with a missionary, somewhere who really needs, who is isolated in some ways, and share with one another. I think the intentionality just to say, you know what, I'm going to initiate this. I'm not going to wait for somebody to do this for me. I'm going to do it for them. And that's how these things get started.
If I can add to that, one of the things you said, you talked about the WhatsApp. I just want to say that whether it's a Voxer app, Marco Polo, WhatsApp, these communication apps can be used as godsends. The pastors I still connect with from seminary days, or even my brother-in-law, who's a pastor out in Iowa City, it is a lifeline to use some of these things when I don't have time to make a phone call and it's more than a text can communicate or an email can communicate. If you haven't explored some of these easy apps that you can talk, basically walkie-talkie, I know it seems so simple, but for me, it has dramatically increased my ability to connect with friends and develop spiritual friendship. Because life is busy.
Yeah. And neither of you are Gen Z. So you're not speaking
You're saying that we're old.
Some are more old than others.
This is very true. If people could see us right now.
Yes. I'm just saying that neither of you are in Gen Z, which means that you're not automatically tech savvy and interested in all things tech, but you have found it useful in relationships. Yeah. So I'm just that's what I said. We've recorded it.
That's good.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time today. I wonder if, as you think again about, we've talked a little bit about just spiritual friendship in general. Just, are you reaching out? Are you connecting? Are you WhatsApping? Are you being a friend? We've talked about maybe formal and informal, maybe thicker and thinner pastoral groups or pastoral groups of various kinds. Any last word as you reflect back on the conversation today? Any final thing you'd want to say or communicate about pastoral groups?
Yeah, I'd like to give Andy the last word, so I'll jump in. I just want to say that it's not all up to you. One of my fears in this is like, what if I fail? What if there isn't a great group that comes together? There can be kind of a human pressure that I put on myself. And taking this to prayer has been such a emotional lifeline for me to say, God, you care about spiritual friendships. You're the one who cares about hearts being encouraged, pastors making it, pastors encouraging one another. And so I just want to be obedient to you. I want to be faithful to reach out to the next person, but ultimately God's got to bring the group together and God's got to sustain that group. And so I would just like to say what has been a balm to my soul, which is it's not all up to you. My role is faithfulness. God's role is fruitfulness, and that's.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. I would also add that for young ministers, start early. Don't just develop your mind in seminary. Develop relationships. You will lean on those relationships probably far more than you anticipate. So don't just do the classroom work. Do that. Make sure that you get your doctrine, your theology, work on those Greek verbs, but also work on relationships. Enjoy relationships. Enjoy those times together. So I would say it's start early, but I would also encourage it's never too late to start.
Yeah.
For those guys who have been down the road, perhaps you've moved to a new setting, whatever your situation might be, it's never too late to start to develop godly pastoral friendships.
Yeah. And that's a wonderful word to end on. Thank you guys. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Andy, for joining us here on the Reformation Fellowship Podcast, sharing your experience, your concerns, and your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Justin.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here on the Reformation Fellowship Podcast. We pray that this time together has been a blessing to you. The Reformation Fellowship is a ministry of union, and so all that we do, we hope it helps you to delight in God, grow in Christ, serve the church, and bless the world. If that is your hope, that is your desire, then friends, welcome to the fellowship.